In 1910, the Rockefellers, Rothschilds, and Morgans met secretly on Jekyll Island. Their plan? Build a system that would protect their banks from ever failing. Prior to this meeting, bankers kept lending money they didn't actually have because every loan meant more interest and hence more profit. But during the 1907 financial crisis, people tried to withdraw their savings and realized the banks didn't have the cash. So this meeting at Jekyll Island was done to create a permanent safety net. The solution they engineered was the Federal Reserve, established in 1913 as America's central bank with a special power, creating money out of thin air. Banks could still collect interest by loaning out money they didn't possess. And if their lending became too reckless, the Federal Reserve would act as their backup. They would just print the money and bail them out. This created a system where they had no risks. Heads, they make billions on interest loans. Tails, taxpayers bail them out. If you're not following Rich's lore, this is probably goodbye. If you are, welcome to seeing wealth differently. In 1910, the Rockefellers,
Hello, good evening and welcome to another Webster report on this Sunday, the 10th of May, 2026 on our Gregorian calendar. We started with what turned out to be the Federal Reserve Act, but it's a blueprint for how the debt-based economy works. And as you've just heard, that there was no risk for these bankers anymore because the public funds were obviously always going to bail them out. So we've seen this being put in place over the last 150, 200 years, Alex. We could go back further because obviously this system is going back a long way. But if we just start with where we're at for the moment, in the last 100 years, we've seen a lot change after 2 world wars. This was set up just before World War One. So you can see the foundation of what the secular world was setting up, ready for this, not only the physical world battle, but for the spiritual one.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we know, I mean, a lot of people misquote the love of money is the root of all evil, and they say money is the root of all evil. It's got a real popular currency, if you pardon the pun. But it is the love of money. I suppose the issue is, like, people love money for lots of different reasons. Like, people with more modest expectations and desires, they just want enough. Whereas people who have money and really feel what it can do, say they're born from privilege, silver spoon and all that, they understand the importance of maintaining it as a competitive advantage over others. So they're rapacious, and obviously your average person isn't thinking about how can I make sure that generations from now, the financial situation of me and my family is guaranteed by making actions against the rest of the world to secure my interests. It's more like the people will save up, they'll save for the kids, they'll do things that normal people do. But when you've got that level of power, privilege and influence, you will probably over time become obvious to you that as the population of the world grows, you need to take some structured measures. And this is in fact what they've done. So actually, from their point of view, the strategy is entirely rational, because they see themselves as a minority, and an increasingly small minority of the world population, because they can't outcompete the rest of the population on population growth metrics. So they've had to find other ways. You know, we know that around that time as well, the schooling system in 1909 when Rockefeller was put in place to institutionalize kids and to, you know, double down on the message like you've often mentioned that the parents give us. The school then, you know, if they can control the parents' thinking and make them conformists, then the school will simply echo the message that the parents have been given, and it's a nice, smooth system. And of course, then all the people who are anomalies nowadays are just called far right. So there'll be some sort of, you know, mechanism for creating outcasts and scapegoats out of those who question the system. But yeah, financially, from their perspective, it isn't enough just to have money in one family generationally, because if your kids are wanton, they could blow it. They could marry the wrong person, get involved with the wrong people, get scammed. So you've really got to rig the system, and obviously they've been thinking about rigging the system and perfecting it for a long time, whereas your average Joe just doesn't think in those terms.
No, it's you can tell there's a definite difference in mentality and how these people think, because if it really was about helping people and making people healthy and making people to be fed and watered all over the world, I think we could have done it so many times over and over and over again. It's ridiculous the amount of money that we spend on. You know, we've spoke about it a few weeks back that the Americans found in the budget that $40 million was spent on making maps gayer. Now, I just don't understand it. I really, you know, when you're starting to talk like that, and, you know, your favourite party at the minute, the Green Party, where the leader of that party says that a woman can have a penis, and they gained seats, Alex. You know, that party gained seats last week. Where I am, all the wards went reform apart from Atherton. So everybody's gone mad for reform, because they've said things that people want dealing with. But how deep are they looking into the manifesto? Does this diversity end, or does it become something else? does Palantir and the digital ID system just suddenly stop, or is there something else? You know, we've got this new hantavirus thing that's coming that, you know, they're just sounding the drums like they did last time. Are people going to fall for this time? Because we've seen the system. We know the system's there. We know they don't really change too much, Alex. But the stuff that we see looking backwards now, and we see just exactly, you know, the way it's all set up. It's we were talking about the brain, that consciously your brain knows something like 400 milliseconds before you actually do the action. No matter how much you're going to try and fool yourself, your brain knows. It's got a conclusion that you're going to do that. Even if you change it 400 milliseconds before you change it, it knows. So if our brains can be programmed, and we run on subconscious most of the time, and our consciousness is preempted almost, what does it say for the people who can actually, you know, use all the media propaganda to actually, you know, program what nation they want?
Yeah, well, it's a massive competitive advantage that they've got, and there isn't much we can, in real terms, do about that. I think the best thing we can do is have a sober view, a realistic view. One of the problems that we find on our side of the fence is that what we might call corporate interests and individual interests run on different tracks. The problem is, because the corporate interests have become so toxic to individual interests now, we tend to see them as two diverging paths. So if something is in the interest of a corporation, we automatically think it isn't in the interests of an individual. But we're at the extreme end of the spectrum there, and it's only got that way because we've allowed it collectively as individuals. If that's not a contradiction in terms, we're a collection of individuals. So it is what we've done collectively as individuals, the choices that we've made. So we've allowed corporates to just be extreme. A lot of the COVID testing with masks and everything else was just a test for them to see how pliable we were to those sorts of operations. And I know they know, you know, we kind of already knew we were, but we didn't know the scale or the extent, just like they didn't, until you see the actual logistics of numbers of people wearing masks, being prepared to be vaccinated. So it should realistically be the case that corporate interests only ever arose originally out of individual interests. So you would expect that, you know, corporate bodies, it's like a transformer with power. It can ramp it up. So when you ramp up the power, that's not a bad thing. It's just leveraging. Now, we know banks leverage in a bad way, but leveraging is actually, or can be, a good thing. Like, as I say, what's happened is the system has now been exclusively given the privilege of putting its concerns completely flying in the face of individual concerns. If we could imagine a world where, you know, corporate power was balanced with individual interests, then we wouldn't be in this mess. So it isn't about corporates versus individuals, not in essence anyway, but it's become that. So how we change that, how we turn that ship around is the big question. We need to not look at it in the wrong way.
That's even more dangerous as they're trying to switch us into more AI and algorithms, isn't it? Because an algorithm is going to tell, you know, if it's programmed to do business, then to eliminate certain things is going to be best for that business. To, you know, as I've said before, in the prison service, we used to rehabilitate prisoners, you know, in the hope that they would leave prison and not come back. But if your business plan is based on customers, then you don't want your customers to not come back. So the prison service clearly took a different path and, you know, went more against, because they believe it's costing them more money. You know, 20 years ago, when I started in the prison service, we facilitated courses through the prison service. Those same courses now, I could go and facilitate those courses on a voluntary basis because they have volunteers to do those courses now instead of paying prison staff to facilitate those courses. So that's what they've done, is they've outsourced everything to companies that say, yeah, we can do that cheaper than they can do it and cheaper than you can do it. And in the end, you end up with prisoners putting fridge magnets together. And there's only so many fridge magnets on a contract before you then putting prisoners in workshops with no work and letting them play cards. But it looks better on your paperwork that they're not locked up in a cell for 23 hours a day because they're in a workshop with no work. Prisoners get bored, and that leads to issues. And then when you've gutted all of the staff and replaced them with mediocre to poor staff, then you're going to have trouble. And that's what the prison service is having again. We're having the same old arguments about, PPE equipment, stab-proof vests and stuff that we've been talking about for forever. But it's only now that the union wants to get involved again and says, oh, we'll do this, that and the other. We're doing it 15, 16 years ago. 2011, we really had the government because people said, well, just work to rule. Well, work to rule doesn't work for them because it doesn't look good on the paper. So we had them, but by dinner time, there was a deal done and we were all back in. We never got to understand what it truly was about. But when you've got people thinking that you've got a pay rise of, something like 1.3 and your inflation's gone up 2.6, you've got a 1.3% pay cut instead of a 1.3% pay rise. So we've got all these facts and figures that we all talk about. And it's the same with these politics now locally. They're pointing at stuff that is pertinent to people and what, we need to do something. But we're going to be arguing about surface stuff again. And I have to look at what the foundation is over the past 70, 80 years of what we've been looking at. And, some of the things that we see, you've just got to you've got to see the pattern and add things up.
6 layers to the control system, fellas. 6 methods used to manage entire populations across human history. Layer 1 you spot in 5 seconds. Layer 6, the people running it barely understand themselves, and every single one is operating on the system you're living inside right now.
The control system doesn't announce itself. The most efficient form of warfare is the one where the target never realizes a war is happening.
The system doesn't kill its enemies, fella. It kills them before they're even born. Buffaloes see a lion cub. They could ignore it. It can't hurt them now. They don't ignore it. They trample it, because in 3 years it becomes the predator that ends them.
A buffalo with a 3-year strategic outlook is outperforming most human voters. Jiggity, that's the level we're being managed at.
That's just animal behavior. Humans don't operate that way at scale.
Layer 1, open force snag. Wars, police states, riot squads, visible methods are the weakest. The public can see them and resist. Real control happens at layers nobody bothers to look at.
Layer 2, health, alcohol, tobacco, pharma, sugar engineered to be addictive, porn and brain rot content, opium wars. Britain flooded China with opium for 40 years until the entire country was sedated. Then took the country. No invasion, just a chemical.
Opium wars were 200 years ago.
Same playbook, different substance. A nation too sedated to organize, too tired to think, too entertained to notice.
You're not addicted by accident. You're addicted by design. The design has been perfected for centuries.
Layer 3, money. The IMF and World Bank don't lend to free nations. They lend to indebted ones. John Perkins wrote a book about it. Confessions of an Economic Hitman. He was the guy. They lend a country billions for projects designed to fail that the country can never repay. Then the lender owns the resources, the votes, the policy. No tank crosses the border.
Argentina, Greece, Indonesia, Nigeria, same lender, same outcome. By the time the country wakes up, it's already owned.
Countries and people choose to take loans. That's not control.
Choice that's been narrowed to one option isn't choice, May. It's a corridor.
A corridor disguised as a hallway disguised as freedom. Jiggity, 3 layers of paint over a cage.
Layer 4, ideology. Edward Bernays, Freud's nephew, used psychoanalysis to manipulate populations. Wrote a book called Propaganda in 1928. He sold cigarettes to women by branding them torches of freedom. Convinced an entire generation that smoking was women's liberation, a product that would kill them and sterilize them at the same time, sold as empowerment.
That's just marketing.
That's not marketing, man. That's reprogramming. The same techniques run on every screen you look at right now. Modern marketing is engineered self-betrayal with better cinematography.
Layer 5, the history. Where whoever controls the past controls the present. JFK assassination files from 1963 are still partially classified. 63 years later, multiple presidents promised full release. None delivered. What exactly were they protecting that's still dangerous in 2026?
A lone gunman case classified for 63 years has somehow become the most guarded secret archive in American history. Giggity, if it was really one guy with a rifle, you wouldn't need 6 decades of secrecy.
History is a political weapon. New regime, new past. The version you were taught wasn't selected for accuracy. It was selected for what it makes you accept about the present.
History is what they let you remember after editing what actually happened.
Layer 6, worldview, the deepest level. But they don't tell you what to think, they decide what's thinkable. Anything outside the model gets labeled conspiracy. Pseudoscience, misinformation. Not because it's wrong, because it's outside the model that benefits them.
A scientist who challenges the model loses funding, then position, then reputation. The science didn't change. The career punishment changed. That's not how knowledge advances. That's how it's contained.
Now look at the profile they're producing, fellow. No real education, endless work, no free time, drowning in debt, living paycheck to paycheck, no savings, bad health, constant entertainment, sons growing up without fathers. We, distracted, addicted. State teaches your kids, not you. The exact profile of a population that can never threaten anyone. Mass produced, globally consistent, quality control.
Here's what they're terrified of, rookies. Strong men, strong families, wealth, time, knowledge. Men who can't be bought, can't be scared, can't be replaced. That's the lion cub. That's why the buffalo move now. While you're still small enough to trample.
You're not attacked because you're dangerous. You're attacked so you never get the chance to be. That's the operating manual.
They didn't fear you because of who you were. They feared you because of who you might become. The job was always to make sure you never did. The buffalo trampled the cub before it learns to roar for a reason. Don't be the cub, fella. Be the one they didn't catch in time. There are...
So we've got some patterns there, Alex. Those patterns have been forming for a long, long time. And the people that are in control of these patterns are the ones that have always been behind the puppets. These are the masters. So we are being told that this is exactly what they're doing. They're not hiding anything. And yet we still speak about the prison bars that people can't see.
There was a good movie, The Fisher King, with Robin Williams and Jeff Bridges in it. Came out in 1991, I think it was, where the DJ, played by Jeff Bridges, he started off, he was a shock jock, and he went up this guy who had a mental health problem, and he blew this. Robin Williams was called Henry Sagan. He was a history teacher, and he blew his wife's head off in a restaurant, and it sent him doolally. And he became a dropout. But it was interesting, at the start of the movie, he's doing all this shock jock stuff, being really cocky, arrogant, full of pride. And you see these shadows, these silhouettes of like lines going up like a prison wall. And he was trapped, but he was trapped in the confines of a quite narcissistically oriented personality. But something I would say about that clip that was quite long was basically, if you look at it, it's all portrayed as if the system, it talks about the control system. And the problem with that thinking is it reduces the truth too simplistically. So when I know it's Family Guy, but I don't know the names of a lot of characters. When the girl is talking, the other perspective, she's being used as a foil to more or less say that the system is this big monster that nobody can do anything about. So it seems as if she's just a foil with a naive view. And the perspective that is played off against that is a correct one, but it's about system control. Was a very famous guy, he only died last month, about age 97, called Jürgen Habermas. He was a German critical theorist. A lot of people will put him down as part of the Frankfurt School and automatically suggest that because he was part of the Frankfurt School, that he was just basically reconstructing Marxism. But there's a lot more to it than that. And Habermas wrote a lot of interesting stuff in 2 books in particular. We talked about system and life world. In fact, I've been doing a lot of thinking about it this week. System is like where the bureaucracies are, where the main message that was coming through then in that kind of Family Guy reel was the system perspective. It has got disproportionate power. It does try and do those things. This is exactly what has been implemented. But the problem with it is it portrays it like as a tour de force or a steamroller, which give the people very little chance to resist it. That's actually not true. That's what's happened in practice, but that was never true. So we do have a freedom, we just do not use it. So there is no inevitability in a system just being able to overpower people. The other thing that Habermas talked about was the life world. The life world is where your friends, families, neighbours, locality, community are. So when Jesus said, love your neighbour as yourself, echoing the Old Testament prescription, this was always the glue of reality. So, first time we brought God up tonight, but theologically speaking, God creates a human race, angelic beings and everything. And he says there's a particular way of configuring community in the right way, orientating it properly, which will give you a sort of immunity to this kind of thing. But when you get corrupted, when you start playing power games yourself, when you start trying to get, oh, my dad's bigger than your dad. If I get in touch with this, if I vote for this part, if I do this, if I bribe this, if I do that, I can get power on my side. So might is right, imperialism, war, domination, they're all expressions of the fall. And, you know, so we have a theology there of fall and sin. But it works out not as a religious prescription. It works out in relationships, in communities, in every type of strategy you can imagine. So, you know, there are systems and there are control systems, and we're in the middle of a very powerful matrix type control system. But there's a life world as well. And the reason why the system wins out is because the life world has been deranged. And the system has no interest in buttressing our life world. It wants to destroy our life world. That's what all these measures are about. Destroy the life world, destroy the culture, destroy the bonds between people. But, you know, they can destroy it, but they can't build it. This is the thing with politics. Politics is very good at destroying culture, but politics will never build culture because it's individual human beings and communities who build culture. You know, even if you don't restrict it to Christianity, faith communities build culture because of values. They have value relationships. They build relationships in a particular way. That's when they value money to bless other people with rather than to hoard it and have an advantage over somebody else and withhold money from them and refuse to bless them. So all these symptoms that we see are merely expressions of a deeper rot, a deeper level of derangement. And if we tackle it at the wrong level, one of the criticisms of Marxist theory, it is a macro theory, it's conflict theory, and it talks primarily about class struggle between the haves and the have-nots, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. That's what Bernie Sanders mobilized, and the Green Party, Zach Polanski. They talk about a politics of grievance. Keir Starmer talks about politics of grievance. Ed Davey talks about politics of grievance. When it comes to people of this country being concerned about migration and illegal migrants, they say that's a politics of grievance. And all the humanitarians go, yes, it's so prejudicial. But your likes of Polanski, they and Sanders use the politics of grievance. They mobilize working class values and the difficulties in the world today to say the real problem is not migrants, it's billionaires. So they also have a politics of grievance. And it's like they're recreating class struggle, which is exactly central to Marxism, which is exactly what the WEF is about, which is exactly what Keir Starmer signed up to. You know, you'll have nothing and be happy. And communism was always, you know, you basically you'll all be equal, but us at the top will be more equal than you are. So it's just a different way of extracting wealth from people and getting them looking sideways and going, well, at least my neighbour's not got more than me. Communism works. Meanwhile, the communists at the top are still living in the palaces and lording it over everybody else. So this is a problem with ideologies. And Marxism was a macro level theory, so it talks exclusively about systems. It doesn't talk about life worlds. Max Weber, he talks about symbolic interactionism and basically individual relationships within culture. But that can't overcome in and of itself the system, the bureaucracy. So Habermas was great because he connected the two of them. He said, you've got to connect together the system and the life world, you know, at two different levels. And there's a bunch of subsystems connecting them. And we can't do without systems. You know, it's not all corporates started off evil. They just need to be redeemed. They become cancerous. Capitalism became crony capitalism. So we need a balanced model, sociologically speaking. There you go. I've not been able to say that for a couple of weeks. We need a balanced model between, you know, the macro level, the system stuff, and it is an oppressive system, the matrix stuff, but also not forget the life world, the stuff we can do as communities and individuals, but mainly communities, neighborhoods and families and friends and so on.
If the world is the machine and the computer that we're meant to build and be part of, then the light, the opposite to that, is meant to be the church. If the world is the secular, the church is meant to be the opposite. But what we've got in this inverted world is we've got the world that's being constructed, that's the copy of God's version. And then we've also now got the spiritual aspect that's building up where, the Vatican has a prayer room in the Vatican for Muslims. Now, I've just seen that there's a nun who's in a little bit of trouble because she's asking why the Pope has allowed Satan a place to pray in the Vatican. And, they obviously don't like that type of language. But we've now got no witness against the world for God. Because the establishments that claim to be Christian are all on board with it. They're all okay that there is more than one way. That's not every individual who is a Catholic or a Protestant, but the ones who don't bother reading the Bible, the ones who just say, well, he's my religious leader, he knows more than me, the ones who say, well, I'm not a scholar, those people are just going to go along with this. And we've already seen this pattern that's being set up. Now, maybe the pattern has been seen through time and time again in the past, because we obviously have had some kinds of resets where populations have been decimated, and then information's been gathered and kept to certain people. So we are still seeing that's still building up. Now, we come after World War II, and during these wars, Alex, it's strange how the stock markets seem to keep going. Doesn't seem to stop the war. And that is interesting. That comes along with this.
Bank of International Settlements remained supposedly neutral, but what they were really doing that entire time, 60 million people were victims of the Nazis in World War II. They were taking money and transferring money, and it was actually business as usual, whether the money was coming from the gold from Czechoslovakia stolen, or from the concentration camps, or from one of the main people.
They were acting as the bank for the Nazis.
Yes,
throughout the entire
one of the
war.
main people was Schreff. He was the head of the Reich Bank. He was Hitler's banker. Well, he was on the board, and the other guy on the board, there was Norman, who was running the Bank of England, also on the board. But guess who else was there? Two lawyers from Wall Street named Alan Dulles and his brother John Foster Dulles.
Yeah.
And the guy running the Bank of International Settlements that was taking all of the Nazi money was a banker from America named McKittrick. So that entire Bank of International Settlements that was supposed to go away in World War I rebirthed itself as the international bank to keep financial transactions going through the entire World War II as if there was no war. Okay? So once you understand that, and then you understand that from there, after they built this architecture to keep the Bank of International Settlements essentially completely protected. So the Bank of International Settlements to this day is completely inviolable. What that means is that nobody has jurisdiction over it. Nobody can look at they cannot be audited. They cannot have any legal action against them. They are completely opaque, completely protected, and they also run all of the central banks, and nobody's allowed to look at them.
That, for me, Alex, that's summing up what's going on with the international banking arrangements. We're worried about the WEF and what they're doing in Europe, but the Bank of International Settlements is bankers to all. There's nothing that's hidden here apart from what they're actually doing with their accounts and their money. But we're not seeing any changes in players. So if there is this worldwide plan, Alex, they're involved in it. Now, does that mean that Trump has now gone against the Bank of International Settlements that has been here for a long, long, long time, or is it going to appear that way? It just looks to me like people are finding that speed bump again. They're not going to know what to do. They're just going to go along with things because I think that's what the system really wants. It presents people with enough options to think that they're making an informed decision, but also so much information that people want that soundbite of truth. You know, it's immigration, it's digital ID, it's just do it, something about them. But what about what's underneath? We don't even go and think about that, but then we'll give them 4 years and then find out about it.
Yeah, I think, you know, I think we've touched on it in the past. It's very, very difficult for people to keep track of all the nuances here. We've got to do what we can. So it's a locus of control issue. Nobody wants to feel like they're a spectator. Nobody wants to feel powerless. I mean, one of the things when people get traumatized is this violation takes place. They're often overpowered, and that stays with them. And I think the world, well, I know the world shrunk just because of the internet. So, you know, when we used to have simpler lives, we maybe had contact with our local communities, and then cars appeared and you could travel a bit further, and then planes were, you know, able to take you across the country, then media expansion. So now you can put the news on and you can find out about any event. So let's just say there's a terrible incident in Zimbabwe, you know, and there's been some uprising, and 200 white farmers have been slaughtered. Now, that might be true. If it funds a narrative for people like us living where we're living, mainly where we are in the West, I'm not saying it's insignificant, but that piece of news alone takes up time. It takes up mental bandwidth. So it gets in our heads, and then things, not just people, things get to live rent-free in our head. So at one time we didn't have that. And it all adds to the burden, really, that it's so complex, the banking system. And you know, even yourself, Paul, when you've looked at, and we had a conversation earlier in the week when I came over on Friday, you know, how difficult it is for people to even grasp the things that you know understand, like the alphabet, the A, B, C, D, E, and people just don't get it no matter how many times you explain it to them. That shows you just how much resistance people have developed over the years, because their conditioning makes it easy for them just to go with a narrative that's given to them. People find comfort in narratives. So, you know, I mean, look at the moon landing. You know, there's all that stuff doing rounds all the time, and people doing ha-ha emojis and then calling everybody else a tinfoil hatter. There's a radical polarization. There's no midway position. We either went to the moon or we didn't. So then the two camps are going to, you know, they're all going to gravitate around, if you pardon that pun as well. Yes, of course we went to the moon, and all these people who say we're not, the tinfoil hat deniers, and the opposite then is also the case, that yeah, look at them idiots believing we went to the moon, it's not possible. Oh yeah, flat earthers calling globe earthers globetards, and so on. And it just becomes this thing where people get a payoff. They get into narratives. They get together with another tribe, and they declare the other side to be completely insane. And it's very difficult to avoid it, because the stakes are incredibly high. If you get this stuff wrong, you could fall off the edge of a cliff. So, you know, I wouldn't want to malign anybody for falling into that. But the things that we find absurd, it's like one man's meat is another man's poison. You know, that's a popular aphorism for a reason. So we're dealing with wall-to-wall polarity, basically. And it's not clear to me at all, how we break that down, because I think it's symptomatic of the way that, in the West at least, we've been viewing reality for a long time. In other words, for me to feel right, whether I am or I'm not, you've got to be wrong. And as long as people are running that script, then I can't see it being anything than more and more entrenched all the time.
I think it's the only way that they can go. They've just got to keep digging it deeper and deeper now, because people aren't even at the bottom of that hole yet, and they still don't believe that the digging their own hole in all of this. You know, it's you ever been in that place where your mate's having a conversation with someone, and no matter what he's saying, it's just making the conversation worse. And somebody's like, "Well, somebody take that spade off him." Well, people are just digging everywhere now, but then they find a bit of truth. So then that's the truth. Then it doesn't matter about anything else. This is the truth. This is the only way to do it. So we must do this or we must do that. And we don't look at the pattern. For me, you know, we had this conversation. Somebody asked me, well, if I put my property into a trust, does it do this? Does it do that? Well, you're still going to put that clouded title into a trust. So even though it's in a trust, it's still going to be looked at as an asset, as a unit, and not actual equity. There's not going to be an actual equitable title there because of presumption. So for me, it's that nip it in the bud, get straight to the root, rip that root out, and then we'll take it from there. Now let's look at what we can debate and what we can argue. But yeah, it does come down to people that they have a belief, and when that belief is going to be challenged, whoever's going to challenge that belief with the information they bring is going to be attacked. The thing that the only issue that I've got, Alex, is it's not a problem with being challenged about information that you've brought. It's about the validity in the challenge. You know, if your argument is everybody pays bills, then you don't actually know about the system you're actually in. And that's a dangerous place to be. If we don't know the language we're speaking and we don't know the actions that we're doing is, not good for us, then something's got to be shaken up there. The way they're planting it is, if we can't go into the courts and get a court opened and it be a court of justice, if we can't get that, then it's leaving people with only one or two options. There's no money to do any of this. There's no money involved in it anyway. We're talking about demographics being changed. We're talking about, it won't even come down to money when it comes down to demographics, because will people do these jobs and you can have this, and people who won't do the jobs, well, you won't be able to do that. We'll be going back 200 years in labour markets because that's what they're pitting against each other. That's all this is going to be now. Is it they're going to pit us against each other? And are we going to just attack each other? Are we going to understand that this is what is being propagated? But we've got to understand that while we're debating all this stuff, this infrastructure is still going ahead. There's, they're not stopping. We can sign as many petitions and protests as we like, but we need to have a see what's going on. Scouse Oracle, she does a lot of great research and she brings facts forwards. It's if people are going to be not only willing to listen, but to engage the brain and think it's all right to say, well, what can you do about this? Well, let's have that conversation.
The political surface of this country's just got a lot more volatile. At the same moment that the administrative architecture underneath is more locked in than it's ever been. Reform has now got more councillors than the Conservatives. Labour's lost, nearly 250 seats overnight. The Tories are down at 126. Greens are doubling. Lib Dems are quietly up. Because while we're watching the count, the entire system's being handed off to an algorithm. Health, welfare, policing, education. People's data moving onto platforms that they didn't vote for and that they can't opt out of. Government not being able to be consistent in the legal direction answer. The architecture's going to absorb whoever you elect. Some are going to accelerate it, but none of it's being built for us to be able to switch it off. Because while voters are being given more and more choice over who governs, the system is literally removing choice over how governance happens. The surface is getting more volatile and the underneath is getting more entrenched. I didn't vote yesterday because Liverpool's not in the cycle. So our vote is next year. So I'll be keeping an eye on what changes and what doesn't because the contracts are public. And just for example, in Essex, Keep a little eye on that. See what Reform do with the multiverse contracts. You know, the company founded by Tony Blair's son. That'll be an interesting watch.
So that's food for thought, that, mate. If we've got all that going on and all these algorithms are going to be running it while we're still debating stuff, things are going to be too late. Tony Blair's son being involved in contracts for this country can't be a good thing, mate. So people are celebrating because on the face of it, that's a big change, that, isn't it, Alex? That Reform have now taken all those seats, but we've got so many defectors from the Conservative Party who had implemented the policies that they're now going against. As somebody said to me during the week, well, they can change their minds, can't they? And that's been the basic problem, that they can change their minds and they can change it whenever they like and for whichever party and whatever time of day it seems to be. When you have parliamentary privilege, which means you can lie to the general public to get what you want, then, you know, where do we go, Al?
There's no single goal for any political party other than to get in power. And, you know, I'm sure there are people who start off in politics. People start off right at the grassroots, dead low down. They sincerely want to change things, and then they come up against, you know, again, look at local politics, local councillors. It's much more life world, like we're talking about from Habermas. The further you climb up that greasy pole of politics into influence and power, they're all backstabbers. They're all waiting to lynch somebody so they can get into power and position themselves for the privilege and benefits and the ego. So that's system. So the more you move from the local and the investment in local issues and really changing things for people, which is what politics should be about, you're moving up at scale to a more universal set of priorities, including international relations and foreign policy, where you're trying to secure an advantage not just over your own people and sustain power, but to secure an advantage for the nation state that you're involved with, if that's what you're doing, unless you're in cahoots with another nation state and you're a traitor and you're selling out, like when Gordon Brown sold all the gold when it was at rock bottom price, and now he's been appointed by Keir Starmer after the disastrous election results, thinking that that's going to increase his kudos because he's brought old Gordon back. So obviously there's a small number of them. Many of them are related, like you say. So the Clintons, the Bushes, you know, there's always the same theme of families getting into politics. So, and then it's no surprise that Tony Blair's son, you know, is going to be, and Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son. I mean, it's like we try and make out that that's to do with politics. It's got everything to do with humans trying to protect their own interests and those of the nearest and dearest. It's just they're at a higher level than most of us. It's, again, if we pretend it's about political systems, it kind of is, but that's cosmetic. It's about human nature. And so I don't want to take it back to theology again, and I won't do it on this occasion because people got sick of it last week. But even if we don't talk about it openly, what we discover is, if we start looking at political systems, modes of social and cultural organisation at the local level, at the infrastructural level, you're always going to get corrupted units playing power politics and petty games and win-lose zero-sum games to, you know, leverage their own interests above their competitors. That seems to be a more sophisticated, you know, we call it democracy and we can pretend it's not savagery and tribalism anymore, but it's just a different mechanism by which we manipulate, use smoke and mirrors to pretend that we're not really savage underneath. It's like, you know, the noble savage. We create this veneer of sophistication, the veneer of democracy, but the reality is it tends to be a swamp of crocodiles. And if you decide to get into the swamp of crocodiles, you better have bigger teeth than the other crocodiles, or you'll get chewed up.
The thing is, though, people are getting into that crocodile pit, knowing they're full of crocodiles, knowing that the nature of the crocodiles, and they're still listening to the crocodiles saying, "We won't eat you. We won't do that. No, that's the other crocodiles. We don't do that. We don't do those kind of things." And as we can see, that the infrastructure's been built. You know, with 5G going on to 6G, whatever that means for people, whatever it means for all these power cabinets and masts that are everywhere, they are going to be broadcasting a frequency. That frequency is going to distort and interact with other electrical frequencies around it. And considering we are in those electrical frequencies, then we have to expect that we're going to be affected by it. You know, when you look back at old technologies where they had swimming pools with copper that would be integrated in with the pool because the pureness of the copper would kill all the bacteria and purify the water, and it would also electrify it. Then when people swim in it, obviously your skin's the massive organ that it is, it absorbs all that. So it would be a healthy thing. This is what public baths and places like this. And in fact, if you look at the churches and cathedrals, how they're set up acoustic wise, with the amount of bells and frequencies that have been changed over all these years, Alex, it's been, as we started the show with, it's a multi-layered attack, and it's from birth. So you know when we look at scripture and it says that the dragon was sat waiting for the seed to attack the seed. So it's from birth. This is life. Dun, 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 dun. This is what we get attacked with. So you know when we've got that basis on top of frequencies, then on top you've got a vaccination program where the people who were promoting the mRNA stated that they were inserting operating systems into people. So if you're inserting an operating system and you're going into a 6G grid soup of that, then what is that going to do with the frequencies inside you? This is where you're going to be able to join onto the internet from within. You know, your iPhone's going to be inside you by 2030, as if this is a really good thing. But once you take that step, then if that isn't Mark, Alex, then it's pretty good chance. Well, it's a good effort, isn't it? Because if that's not the mark, how do you get back from that? Because whatever's going on in your head, then how are you ever going to know whether it's you or the internet? Because you're putting yourself into an AI algorithm that has been programmed, and you've got to start debating that. You could end up going insane with that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, the question is, I keep saying it. We said it last week, and it attracted some boos from the audience. But it's like, depending on what you answer, I'm just not going to answer it this time. But it's what grounds you. What grounds you? You know, what is ground zero? What's the foundation? For most people, it's getting up in the morning and still being alive, then doing what they're supposed to do every day, go to work to earn the money, to pay the taxes to these parasites who are putting more and more pressure and pain on people. But they don't know what else to do. We live in a material world, to quote Madonna. So, you know, what are we going to do about the fact that if we don't get our shrink wrapped chicken from the supermarket, do we keep them at home and wring their necks when we fancy chicken dinner, or do we just keep them for eggs? And will the government bring out a bird flu chicken control protocol because they don't want people doing it? So the system will continue to battle against the life world, and we have to make big decisions about how far we make concessions, because again, they bring the biometric testing out for if you want to go anywhere in Europe, and basically then if you understand the truth of biometrics, that could be like a mark, that could be the beginning of a mark, a slippery slope. So do you then say, well, I won't go on any European holidays ever, no EU holidays ever again? So that's a decision I've taken. I won't travel and give my biometrics. A lot of people think that's unnecessary, but I don't. So the thing is, these decisions are following us around everywhere, and they are restricting people's lives. 15-minute cities now in Oxford just becoming established. How do you challenge them? Well, by not complying. Then when they take you to court, fighting it. So at that level, some of your freedoms you can fight for. And when you fight for it, that will mean civil disobedience. And the system will come down on you because it's legislating everything. And it will say you've crossed the line. Like it does with speeding, variable speed limits, just creating. Oh yeah, it's 70 on a motorway. So we have a problem. We can't really get money off people if they're, and there's not that many go over 70, and we have to police it with coppers. That's expensive. We're not making enough money. Oh, we better talk about congestion of variable speed limits where we can change it 60, 50, 40, 50, 60, 37, 87.25, whatever. Just invent whatever number you want. Change it every couple of seconds if you fancy it, and catch people in a speed trap. And then suddenly you can monetize motorways. So if people are not going to travel on motorways, they won't encounter variable speed limits. But that means they won't be traveling down to Cornwall in a day if they're in the north of England, because you need to use motorways. So if you get caught in a variable speed limit, you're risking a fine. You might know that. You might know they do it all the time. They do near Birmingham. But then it's in your head. As soon as the government's in your head, that's what Michel Foucault spoke about, the panopticon. You've got this governance that's been put inside of you, which you're obeying, and is bringing about anxiety. Fear of this, fear of that. You don't want to open, with me a lot of the time, I don't want to open my mailbox, which is, I haven't got a regular letterbox. I don't want to open it because of what I might find. If I think, oh, did I go through? Oh, it's a variable speed limit. Did I get caught? And then for 2 weeks, you're in agony. And you can say, oh, just forget about it. But then they're increasingly putting people under pressure. So it's like, yeah, £100, £100, 3 points on your license, insurance premiums go up. And that's just one area of life. So we're coming under more and more surveillance. So to a degree, you can hide. You can live in the cracks. You can shrink your life down. You could volunteer and go, yeah, actually, maybe 15-minute cities are a good idea. Maybe I'll get an electric bike. Maybe I won't travel as far because they've artificially leveraged the price of diesel through the Strait of Hormuz ruse. Right, yeah, I'll tell you what, I'll just stay local. And they won't even have to impose 15-minute cities because people will just be choosing to do that to stop the pain that's being inflicted on them. So it's very difficult for people because a lot of it's a creeping death. When a system comes out and has to use very overt measures, that's the difference between a beast and a serpent. A serpent cloaks itself. A serpent tries to get you to police yourself. A serpent tries to get you to choose the poison instead of it poisoning you. It will poison you if it's got no alternative. But as soon as you poison someone, it's like a nuclear attack. It's very visible. People realize they've been attacked and they know who they've been attacked by. So you draw attention to yourself. So a system would rather be serpentine to hide what it's doing. And only when it gets challenged does it become more beast-like. But, this is what we're dealing with. So then we all play the cat and mouse with it and say, all right, then I'll make a concession with this. I'll keep my nose clean. I'll stay clear of all the traps. But to do that, you have to shrink your life down. You're losing your freedoms. And you think you're doing it voluntarily, but you're doing it to sidestep the pressure they're putting you under. So eventually it will catch up with everyone. People just hope it won't. They carry on for as long as possible trying to dodge the system, but it's coming for us. So, we have to build stronger life worlds because otherwise what I said earlier would be false. It's, the system, fear the system, we can't do anything. Build better life worlds. And in terms of the theology and faith, Christian faith, it's the church. If you look at Islam, what it does, no matter what you think about its theology, very close communities, very close Muslim communities stick together, look after their old people, look after each other in business. So at the end of the day, we could learn a lot from that.
I think we should have been learning from everything that's happening in this world. When we look, certainly when I look back to when I was growing up, I certainly had no interest in politics, and as long as my mum would give me money for stuff and I had things, I weren't interested in stuff like that. But when I look back, we were having the same debates, Alex. Early 1970s, we were having electric power cuts and saving on this and stuff like that. So they're not changing anything. It's the same cycle that they're spinning again. This is now another. I mean, you were saying that the serpent will get us to do its bidding, and it's our fault then. I didn't ask it. I didn't force you to do that. But that's what happened with all the vaccines. I mean, again, I've already been to the local crematorium twice this year. I'm not expecting to go, but I think I'll be going a couple of more times, because the general public did something that I didn't think that the general public would ever do, and that was follow what the government was saying to the T, because of fear that just with some thought you could see that there was some type of an agenda here. I mean, we did have some background from 2009 where they were saying that this stuff would come, but I never thought people would fall for it like they did. Personal friends and family of mine, you know, I only last week, well, I thought I was doing the right thing. It was an informed decision. I don't know how it was informed, because if you was informed, you wouldn't have done it. All I can say is that you got some information and still went with the panic. I don't know anybody who regrets not having the jabs, but I know everybody who's had them regrets having them. You know, I don't see anybody who says there's nothing wrong with me anymore. I did have one of you who held 3 vaccine cards in front of me and said, there's nothing wrong with me, and he's not here anymore. So we've allowed government to pass policies that are going to commit the absolute definition of genocide, where they're bringing a whole new set of people into the country illegally by policy. This isn't legal migration. This isn't people coming looking for a better life and wanting to integrate, and that's not what this is about. We can clearly see that's not what it's about, and it's being used as that red rag to the bull to get this, whatever it is they want, up and running. And people don't know how to articulate it, Alex, but they get angry and they get annoyed and they don't know where to take this out, because we should be able to go to a courtroom and sort this out straight away. Everything that you talked about then, variable speed cameras, commerce, nothing to do with you driving to Cornwall, mate. Unless we say, oh, driving, you said driving, that means you're using a motor vehicle on public roads for monetary gain. We've got to be able to say, no, how are you making this presumption? Well, we know the car is registered. Mr., Mrs. has registered a vehicle. Private light goods, that's commercial speak. You can be private and still be commercial. You can have light goods and still be commercial. So everything is written as a commercial, especially with that title being on it. That car is a business asset, so it must be being used for commerce because it's been registered as that. So if we remove that title, we've seen it happen that we can't register your vehicle, but you can still tax, MOT and insure it. Well, that's all I want. What's the difference then? Apparently, the police legislation isn't applicable if it's not registered. Well, why would it need to be? Because it's registered as a company vehicle, and a company vehicle will come under fines and speeding and things like that. So if we've done that with our kids, you know, I mean, did we register kids under a Mr. title? That would be interesting to have in a court, because I know years ago that a couple had 3 kids taken on a Friday, and on the Monday they brought the middle child back because the middle child hadn't been registered. So they didn't have a claim on that child and they brought that child back. That was only because there was an ex-social worker working with that family who could point these things out, and we're going back 15 years there. So we're still having these same debates. How is it people are knowing that there is a complete parity between these jurisdictions, yet we're not hitting it? Nobody's in that court pointing at that title, changing that title, because they're too busy arguing about other things. So if they're pointing at the root, if they're stood on that title, it doesn't matter what you talk about, because if you don't rebut the title, if that's what it is that they're stood on, then everything stands, Alex. And that means that we're just wasting time and energy. People need to clean up these titles. Now what are you going to presume? Let's go into a court and say, were you presuming this commerce? Let's see if we can do it that way. We only needed numbers 10 years ago. We've got numbers, but we're arguing about different things. There's no point standing there saying, I'm a man, I have no contract. It's not about contracts. So for me, it's about the presumption. And if the presumption is that title, Alex, that's the first thing we've got to clear up. Now, what are you presuming? Let's see where else they go. I think, to be fair, that's got to be an easier thing than going protesting in London and trying to change what the international bankers are doing. We've got to start locally. You've got all these new councillors that have come in, yet not one of them will sit and talk with me about council tax. But they've discovered all this expenditure on these other things that they've wasted money on. That's council tax money that people are paying that they shouldn't be paying. Yet we'll argue about that. We're getting to the point, Alex, where we've got to stop the arguing and go straight for the root causes. Get the root causes done and then see where we stand. There's no point trimming the top of the tree and thinking we're winning if we need to get down to the root of the tree.
Yeah. I mean, the thing about this is, I think it was Martin that was saying before, I think it was, that it does take a lot of, these things take a lot of time. It might not have been Martin, I don't know. But you've seen it yourself. Sometimes
Martin's just said pay your bills. Martin's just said pay your bills. Now, that is either a tongue-in-cheek or he absolutely doesn't understand the debt-based economy that he's in. And it's either a really stupid comment or it's a comment that's trying to be funny. It doesn't seem to matter. The fact the gas has been delivered down the pipes is what I've paid for in my taxes, for the gas to be refined, for it to be plumbed in, for it to be transported. All of that has been paid for in taxes by creditors. So creditors don't pay, only debtors pay. Now, if you can't understand the difference between that, a shopkeeper uses electric in his shop to make profit. When you go home, the creditor is not making profit, he must set off. So if you can't understand the difference between them, then don't make comments. Go and learn. Because you're part of the problem.
Yeah, I think sometimes people get a bit contentious in chat. I suppose people every week, it's hard, isn't it? Like we've said many times, the world does change, but it moves really slowly. And I think when we were having that conversation on Friday, Paul, I was saying that originally the elites, the oligarchs, however you want to see them, they used to have to go slower when Labour were in power and faster when the Tories were in power, because the Tories were imposing economic policies that were more conducive to their agenda. But now it's sort of reversed. They go faster under Labour and slower if the right wing or the Tories are in. And that's because the right wing now, even though they had right wing economic policies which suited crony capitalism and made space for crony capitalism to thrive and rip the people off, the right in its economic policies has also placed a great premium on the rights of individuals, whereas the left, when it was really socialist leaning in an obvious way, it was more concerned about the collective, or at least pretending to be. So now, like with the Green Party nonsense, it's no longer about economic theory and the left. It's all about human rights and the rights of minorities in particular. I mean, the wet dream of the left now is to find, if they could find like two individuals who share the same issue and nobody else on the planet does, they would want a policy that protects those two people against the oppressive 8 billion others who are not in that position, because then they can leverage policies on behalf of the two against the other 8 billion that are not in that position. So when you get minorities, the smaller they are, the better they are for the oligarchs to weaponize against the majority, because they can claim that they're protecting, because of social justice principles, they're protecting this small minority. So again, one person's an individual, so you'd have to have two people. But if you could just protect two people against the interests of everybody else, it's perfect for them, because then they can just say that these two have got a specific need or a specific requirement, and they've got a legislature to protect them against the other 8 billion, so they can implement what they want through that legislation. That's how they're doing it, and that's how Marxism became neo-Marxist. It moved away from an economic theory because Marx's labour theory of value was refuted. When he was writing Das Kapital, Volume 3, he stopped writing it because he realised his economic theories were wrong. So the Frankfurt School, what they did, there was a guy, Erich Fromm, he took a lot of Marx's ideas, applied them in psychology. Then there were people like Habermas, Herbert Marcuse, they applied these ideas in sociology. And so they got applied in different domains. And it became a broader cultural theory that was not about economic disparity, haves and have-nots, proletariat and bourgeoisie. It was about the rights of this person over against that person. And that was like, that's a field there. That's what you see. The Greens are the extreme example of that now. It's, protect trans, protect this, protect that. Like you said about cats, you want to go and defecate in a litter tray, right? Well, you've got to have the right to defecate in a litter tray or bark like a dog. So this is a classic example of take these really, really small, insane groups and give them the same rights as everybody else and protect them. So it got worse, actually, when Marxism got restructured. It became a really big problem, and a far bigger problem than traditional socialism.
Yeah, I was just answering somebody in the chat room that said that Thatcher sold all our utilities off. It's only the operational management that was sold. We employed managers to do it with subcontract. We don't actually have it as national that we would employ people and run it, because we said we put it out for tender and private companies said, well, we can do it. So we haven't sold anything off. It's just the management. And what's happened is, like we have with the country, we've employed managers. You've got 457 MPs who are meant to take all our complaints and moaning, go to Parliament and tell the executive what we want doing. Well, the executive just run the shop how they see fit, because we're not there. We don't bother with it. We don't hold them to account, and we can't look at them. They can't even set off the bills. They can't even balance them. So everything's going to be our fault, Alex. But when we're being taught all this from the beginning, there's no defense, because ignorance of that is no excuse when you can take 2 minutes to find the bills of exchange and start to look at it. And from there, read it all and understand it. Oh, it's too much. Oh, it's too complicated. Oh, I don't really want to do that. I'll just carry on paying my bills. That's all they need. That's all they need. Martin Niemöller every week. Just not affecting me. It's not going to touch me. So we'll just carry on. We've got now generations just vaccinated. We've got, people going for more vaccinations now. Fortunately, I do know a lot of people who say they won't be having any more, but they haven't got to the point where they can't do, well, you can't do that. So you're forcing me to have a vaccine. No, you don't have to have it, but you can't do that. You can't go there. You can't do this. You mentioned about 15-minute cities. People will end up volunteering because it is too painful to do all that. And then it'll be, well, if you're not vaccinated, you've got to go there for your shopping and do this, that, and the other. It's all about divide, all about division, all about putting people into positions of ill health where they're going to possibly slowly, over time, deteriorate, because these aren't quick things, even though I've seen some, I've never heard the term turbo cancer up until the last few years, mate. But when you've known people who've had cancer before and fought it off and, they've been clear for years, and then within months, it's boom, and there's no coming back. You know, in the last 2 months, 2 people have died from a rare lung disease who I know personally, which is basically arthritis in your lungs. And they're not sure what caused it. It's quite rare, though. 2 people within months of each other who I know. And the first question is, how many jobs? Well, how many, you know, people have just lost people. You don't go and ask questions like that. So there's never a debate. But then it comes down to genetics. Oh, well, you know, my nan had it, and my nan had cancer, and this, that, and the other. And it, you know, I was talking to my mate yesterday, and I said, and we know it's not genetic, don't we, Eddie? Because Bruce Lipton told us all those years ago. Because he was telling us that the genetics can be in a bad environment, and the environment's cleaned up, and everything clears up. You know, so there was so much in science to question, biology, everything. There was so many questions that I was full of to find out, full of those questions. But when you get to the point where gas, water, and electric, and you're going, you're not meant to pay these. This can't be right. You know, the other stuff, we can ask questions about that, but everybody does this. There's no way that this can be right. And then you just see it. You just see it for what it is, and you think, how have they done this? How have they just got away with it? Just taught our parents, and our parents said, yeah, that's what you do. But if you knew that you was doing something, and every time you did that, you gifted something to somebody else that was detrimental to you, at what point would you go, hang on a minute, when I do that, that causes me pain, but they get all that? But, you know, at what point, Alex, does your logic kick in and say there's something not right here? That doesn't seem to happen with these people, with the general public. Work hard, pay your bills. Oh, council tax has gone up. I'll have to go and get an extra job or something. There's no thinking about dismantling the system, because the poor will defend. They'll fight for this system to defend it, and it's the system that keeps them poor.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we've talked about that as well. When people don't develop in this life world that I talked about, you know, in reference to Habermas, people can build resilience in a life world. But if your primary relationship is with a system, imagine if you're totally, you know, enslaved to the treadmill, the hamster wheel, and the whole corporate system. You pay everything by direct debit. You when you go to the supermarket, you always pay by card. You don't pay by cash. You've already made concessions to what they want, and purportedly under the grounds of ease. But every time you do that, you get short-term ease, but longer-term problems, and that's the payoff. Same as credit culture: buy now, pay later. Oh, it's easier now. It means I don't have to do this. Oh, it's easier now. I don't need to do this. And the primary problem for human beings, it has to be said, is laziness. We've become incredibly complacent and lazy, and this is what makes us so controllable. Now, unless people make concrete changes to commit to being a part of the life world rather than a system, you know, when they came up to Jesus and they were trying to trick him, and they put a coin under him. Well, he got a coin out. He said, you know, is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar? The Pharisees then were asking a system question. You know, Jesus, we're all within this system under Roman rule. And they tried to trip him up, because if he said yes, you know, pay to Caesar, then he would have been a disloyal Jew. And if he said, no, don't pay taxes to Caesar, he could have been portrayed as a rebel that the Romans would kill, which is what they wanted. So he then said, you know, look, he took out a coin. He shifted the whole ground of the debate. It's not a this or that, a yes or no. It's in the middle. Okay, you see this coin here, he said. Whose inscription is this? In other words, who does it belong to? Right, so it's Caesar's. Right, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. That was a sophisticated answer, showing that he thinks and he wasn't liable to be trapped. Most people are trapped in that system. Now, that was a system question. But in life world, Jesus was saying, yes, there is a system. And here's a coin, and it's got Caesar's imprint on it. But there's a life world, you know, and you've got God in your life world. And so render those things to him and to your community and to your culture. And yes, of course, you're in a system, but you're not totally hidebound by that system. Do the bare minimum. Like you've often talked about the monopoly piece. So if people get to the point of being able to operate within a system that should be fit for purpose, the system would work properly. And it's because we've abdicated that responsibility, which is why people might say you bang on about it every week in that respect. But if you're only doing that because people aren't taking on board the reality of what that means, use your monopoly piece. And we need, and even if it's not a criticism that you're making, you're saying there needs to be a cultural shift. More people need to see it that way, because unless you see it that way first, you won't have a conviction. Just like if you don't see it that way, you'll fall into the Pharisees' trap. But Jesus saw it was much more complex and nuanced than that. So he says, yes, there's a system, but there is a life world. Live in the life world and do the bare minimum to engage with the system, the bare minimum monopoly piece. That's effectively what Jesus is saying. You know, your monopoly piece, you see this coin here, you use that to buy some stuff because you're using Roman coinage. Right? So just use your Roman coinage and don't read too much into it. So basically, that's what we need to do.
That's exactly the same point as when people say to me, well, you're not paying for your gas, water and electric. You've already paid it, because the system is set up that you volunteer your work, your toil, and then your tax. You allow that for this infrastructure to be built and looked after. You're happy to do that. That's part of your consent. But people don't realise that that's exactly what they're doing. They're just being taught that that's life. But again, Alex, the last 5 years now, we've got all this vaccine program. Whatever's coming on top of this, we've had the vaccine program. We've had, you know, you've got so many embalmers, undertakers saying that they're seeing all these anomalies, and this is brand new for the last 5 years. So we're going to see a massive dip in populations who've had these jabs. Now, you know, we've talked about the genetic warfare before, where you could inject 100 people with a vaccine, and it could be set up that in that vaccine there is warfare that would go to genetic war against a certain ethnicity. It could be white, it could be blacks, it could be Asians. They could target that. They could use all that. They could, people who've got a propensity to, who've had cancer, they could boost that. They could do all of this. They could even do it with frequencies, because with a Rife machine, they were curing, you know, I put that in speech marks, curing cancers with frequencies. So there's a thing about these vaccines, and now they're doing studies, Alex. We're seeing, you know, we've seen cancers go up something like 500% in all cancers in the vaccinated populace against the unvaccinated. Now, they've only, the one study that I saw, that they'd done 1,400 people vaccinated and 1,400 non-vaccinated, and they came up with these type of results. So I think we've got to start incorporating this into the conversation as well, because this is government policy and people are voting.
So we're told vaccines make you healthier. Is that really the truth? Take a look at this.
People want to know, does vaccination make me healthy? And the answer from all of the unvaccinated control group studies to date is no. Vaccination does not make you healthier. Vaccination increases your risk of suffering a lifelong debilitating disorder by over 1,000%, 10 times greater. In many cases, the number is significantly higher, such as for the case of diabetes. In America, 1 out of 10 individuals has diabetes. But in our unvaccinated control group study of 1,428 Americans, we did not find a single case.
Uh-oh, Webby, you disconnected. Alex, you still there? All right. Well, looks like Webby accidentally got disconnected.
Yeah. Unfortunately, let me just try change my lighting. That's better. Yeah. I had to move and get my laptop plugged in. It was down on battery. How are you doing, Taylor?
I'm doing all right. Everything, just hanging in there, just waiting for this movie to hopefully soon progress to its effective climax. It looks like we're getting there, but you know.
Yeah. So what's it? We not heard from you for a few weeks. So obviously there's a bit to catch up on. Paul will hopefully be back within a few minutes. We don't know what's happened. But how would you read? Because obviously things have gone very quiet on the Straits of Hormuz from our perspective. But we know our fuel prices in the UK at least have not come down at all and probably won't do for several weeks or months. It looks like diesel prices, I don't know in the US if diesel prices have been artificially hiked above regular unleaded prices, but it looks like war is being waged against the diesel. It looks like they're maximising the Hormuz thing, whether it's happening or not, in the news, it's being leveraged to, threaten of fuel shortages for flights, for holidaymakers. So it's causing maximum disruption. And obviously over here, Taylor, we've had these local elections recently, which have been just in the last few days a wipeout for Labour, but Keir Starmer's hanging on. So is this part of the strategy with affecting global travel with flights, do you think, in terms of Trump's agenda to wake people up then?
Well, at the end of the day, I'll put it like this. Personally, if I had to give my personal thoughts on this whole thing, I personally think this is a little bit overkill. Personally, this whole pushing the idea, just whole raising the gas, the price of diesel and all that stuff. Personally, I think it's a bit overkill. I feel like it's about time to just bring on the freaking just like stop freaking treating the normies like they're children and just bring out the child sex trafficking images and the arrest of Obama and the 9/11 truth. Like, bring all that stuff out already. Like, freaking instead of this whole slow walk, because I feel like at this point we're just getting minimal returns on waking normies up, especially the lefties who, whether they hate Trump or even the ones that like Trump. At the end of the day, people, I feel like we're just at that stage where we're just getting minimal returns for far too much damage, even if it's only on an optic level. People are pretty depressed and people are pretty they're feeling very nihilistic at the moment. And I really don't blame them. And even people that I interact with in the Anon community have kind of gotten sick of this whole thing about just, following the comms and, the 17s and all that.
Yeah.
So, that's just my personal thoughts on that whole thing. Now, we have heard, obviously we still have good things happening behind the scenes. But, what I want to see is good stuff on the optic realm. It was cool. We saw a couple weeks ago with the Southern Poverty Law Center getting exposed. That was a big one because obviously that was a huge organization of the deep state that they used for decades in order to manipulate public opinion into thinking that the quote unquote right wing is extremist and violent and all that nonsense. So there's that. That being said, I do obviously that last quote unquote assassination attempt on Trump a couple weeks ago was absolutely hilarious, especially when you see the part when the Secret Service quote unquote secured the safety of J.D. Vance before Trump himself, which that really tickled a lot of people's intrigue. I've noticed on social media. So there's that whole thing.
I think the funniest one, Taylor, was where the gunman ran through the metal detector past all the Secret Service agents.
Yeah, that was hilarious.
Didn't even notice him until he ran past them. Then they all pull guns and run off.
Oh yeah, it's like, what is this, a Looney Tunes cartoon? Like, this is even worse than the 1968 assassination of Robert Kennedy. At least back then in the 60s, you didn't have the technology you have today. Like, damn, bro. It's hilarious.
I played a clip earlier on where they were talking about the Bank of International Settlements, which was basically run by who was running Hitler's bank, and it carried on making all these payments as if there wasn't a war going on. And the Dulles brothers came up, who were both involved. And as you well know, Alan Dulles was on the Warren Commission, and one who, was obviously didn't like Mr. Kennedy very much. So we again, that's part of the pattern that me and Alex were talking about from the beginning of the show. The patterns, Taylor, are just the patterns are just unbelievable at the minute.
I just want to sorry to interrupt. I just want to say that speaking of the Kennedy assassination, and I'm glad you brought that up actually, because I've been reading. I don't know if you've been following, but on my Rumble channel, but I've been reading the book Final Judgment by Michael Collins Piper, and holy crap, I have learned quite a bit of stuff from this book. Here's the thing. I already knew that Israel was the ultimate hand behind the scenes behind the Kennedy assassination, the Israeli Mossad, obviously. But I didn't know to the extent and the links that that all the different organizations that were involved in it were connected. Like, for example, when a lot of JFK researchers, they like to point the hand at the mafia or the CIA or the anti-Castro Cubans or even the quote unquote right wing, which is ridiculous. But regardless, most of those things you can actually put together and link together in via the Mossad, because every single one of these key players were all controlled by some form of Mossad/Israel control. Like, for example, if you want, I don't know if you maybe you already know this, but I just want to point this out in case you don't. When people talk about the mafia, right? They talk about usually the Sicilian/Italian mafia, like Sam Giancana, Santo Trafficante, Carlos Marcello, et cetera, et cetera. But the thing that a lot of these mafia researchers never talk about, especially in relation to the Kennedy assassination, is the man known as Meyer Lansky, how he was the true head of the International Crime Syndicate, Jewish and hardcore pro-Israeli, and he was actually one of the key financiers of the state of Israel. A lot of the money that went to Israel, to the Irguns and the Haganas and the Stern Gang, they came from Lansky's connections through the International Crime Syndicate, shipped straight to Israel, in order to form a state. Not to mention also the head of the true head of the Chicago mob, Hyman Larner, also Jewish, close friend of Lansky. And then there's the connections to the Permendex Corporation, which is where the Mossad had everything, which was their main bank that they used to connect everything else regarding the Kennedy assassination. There's so much there that most JFK researchers don't talk about. And several years ago when I first came on Raconteurs News, you remember how I would always like fanboy over Francis Richard Connolly's JFK to 9/11, everything's a rich man's truth.
Yeah.
Well, in hindsight, I just want to say, well, first of all, nothing against Francis, because either he didn't know it or whatever. He was one of my first red pills, so I have nothing against the guy. But I want to say that there's so much wrong about his documentary, or something, or a lot of things that were either left out, whether intentionally or unintentionally, I don't know. But there's just so much. And just to anyone who wants to really delve into the true nitty grittiness of the Kennedy assassination, if you're interested in that topic, go read Final Judgment by Michael Collins Piper. That is probably the best book on the subject that I have ever read, and it's very long, but it's very filled with details and links everything.
I think what Francis was doing, I think Francis is trying to take an overview, but mainly it's the middle bit. I don't think Francis could have. Maybe he did know about it, maybe he didn't, but it was going to be difficult for him to fit everything into those documentaries. You've got to be, you've got to try and pick what you can put in and what are going to keep people interested and lead people into the truth, rather than, giving them all these rabbit holes and letting them go and look themselves. Give them something to anchor, and then do that. That's why me and Alex, when we talk about scripture, we stick with the Bible. If it's against the Bible, we don't bother with it. Everything else we bring to the Bible and test it with the Bible. That's what I think all good researchers do. I know Dave von Kleist, who was on Raconteurs News as well with us. He made 9/11 in plain sight, because whilst everybody else who'd done the 9/11 documentaries were being challenged and attacked, they couldn't attack Dave because he was just asking questions all the way through his documentary. And I think that's probably one of the best things to do when you do documentaries, is to present evidence and leave it to the general public to decide. But if we give them too much, Taylor, there's too much for him to think about. So I take your point, but there's no way anybody could fit stuff like that in. Do you remember I interviewed Dennis Wise on Raconteurs News?
You interviewed Dennis Wise? I did not know that one. I need to watch that. I need to watch that one.
Yeah, it's on Raconteurs News.
Oh crap! I did not see that one. How did I not see that? Okay, I don't
know. But he did. Obviously, he did Adolf Hitler, the greatest story never told, over 6 hours worth of documentary, and he said I could have done another one. He could have done another 6 hours with the information that he'd got from his father's side. You know, when his father's fought for Germany and he ends up living in Yorkshire in Leeds, and his son comes home from school and says, "Dad, why was he so bad? Why did he kill all those people?" And his dad just looked at him and sighed and said, "It wasn't quite like that, son." And then sat down and got all his books out. You know, Dennis tells you everything. And what it does is it gives you that balance. And now you've got a subject with two questions. If you can hold the two questions and not just have a belief in one, that means you can critically think. The problem is we just don't seem to have critical thinkers. And I think partially that is down to brainwashing. You know, kids have been brought up with iPads and stuff like that these days. And we know that takes away that critical part of thinking, because up to the age of 7, you're just a sponge. You just take in all this information. After 7, you start to critically think. But what if you've never been given the chance to think? You know, it's something that these people have certainly known. But I do take your point, mate. It's just difficult to get all that in. I know Francis has done a lot of work, but he's done it old school. You know, he had a lot of that information before we came along with internet and AI and stuff like that.
That is true. Yeah.
I think we've got to. We can add a lot. I mean, do you know? It's only just in the last couple of weeks I've seen somebody posting about the JFK shooting has been solved because it was the limousine driver. And you know, all it takes is to just watch the video, and you can see that there's no gun. There's just Brill cream shining from behind the sun visor, just at the right height and at the right point. Yet people are bought into that, and it's all done and dusted. So it's difficult if you give people too much information, Taylor. They get it wrong anyway. So you try and not just give them the one piece of information, because it's easy for you to push that away. But you build it up. You give people the chance to, well, this and this and this and this. And before long, they've got half a dozen things that they've got to get rid of before they can go back and sit under their belief. If they refuse to look at those things and still sit under their belief, then you know you absolutely know that you're talking to somebody who's closed off. Stockholm syndrome. We've got so many things we can call it, but the one thing that we are running short on is critical thinkers. And I think it's proved it recently with our voting over here, Taylor. We've got a Green Party that Alex loves. I'm sure Alex went and ticked the right box on the 7th. But we've got people voting for a party whose leader says that a woman can have a penis. Now, that's one part, that's one seat, that, Taylor. So it's a bit of a scary world that we're all sat in at the minute.
Well, Q once said, like, 2018, I forget which post and when it was posted, but he said at one point that elections at this point do not matter. And he could have been just referring to the United States. I don't know if he meant worldwide.
Worldwide.
Probably. That would make sense. But it really comes down to the fact that all of this is happening for everything that happens is happening for a reason, because it's a script. So it's all just a matter of we can sit here and try to analyze why this is happening, but at the end of the day, we don't have the script in hand. We can't say for sure until the fireworks happen. And at the end of the day, it's like I was telling Alex before when you got booted. Personally, I'm kind of like at that mentally fatigued state of trying to analyze comms and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, everything that happens is for a reason. Everything is still proceeding. It's just a matter of keeping your head on your shoulders. Sometimes you got to take a step back, hang out with family, go have some fun, go to the park or whatever. Don't get addicted to the news cycle. And
Mate, are you kidding? I went to a barbecue. Do you know how long it took them to start talking about politics? I've not even put ketchup on my burger, mate.
Damn, man! I've never been to a barbecue party before, man. It sounds fun.
No
though.
way! You're from America and you've never been to a barbecue, mate.
Bro, if you have seen the state of America, man, like so many people are like. Oh, go ahead, Alex.
Shocking! I just have to ring in with that, Taylor. That you've not experienced a barbecue. That.
If you'd be surprised at how antisocial this country is.
You need to experience. Yeah. Wow.
Especially after
I think
COVID.
you started lagging, Alex.
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
You've started lagging.
We'll have to send you a burger. We'll have to send you a burger through the post, Taylor.
Man, I would love that. But keep in mind, I'm not really like a super heavy on the accessories kind of guy. I usually like to keep my burgers like plain and simple, as in just usually cheese, ketchup, maybe a little bit of mayo, just to liven it up a little bit, but nothing beyond. I don't do like pickles or anything like that.
Well, this is one of the candidates that have now become a Green Party MP for a place in Preston. Again, all very interesting, all very diverse and inclusive.
Diverse and inclusive. Oh my god.
So, unusual. As I said with a couple of the other interviews, this was an unexpected result. I'm obviously very happy with the result, but unexpected. I was expecting Labour to retain the hold on the city centre, but I'm eager to get started.
And the first Green council level Preston City Council in its history.
Yes, that is also makes it extra nerve-wracking.
What are your priorities?
As I said, the main priorities for the Preston Green Party that we have campaigned on are the protection of green spaces, the creation of new social housing, creation of new social housing, and attempting to help tackle the cost of living crisis.
Should you be the lone Green Party member, not that it's early days, yes, you could be joined by a bigger group, but should you end up being the lone Green Party member, how much of an influence do you think you can have?
I'm not sure at this point. I am very new to council politics, but I'm hoping that working with friendly voices on the council, we can make headway in tackling this. I don't believe we are the only party who wants to tackle these issues necessarily, and I do think politics is about cooperation as much as it is about having different points of view.
Are you looking forward to it?
Yes.
Councillor Buemeler, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Oh, man.
Councillor Barlow, mate. Councillor Barlow, Alex.
Sometimes some of the most damaged people are some of the most beautiful people, and I'm not even blagging when I say that. I mean, the thing about this is, you see the lunacy, and like I was saying about the neo-Marxist, the Frankfurt School, when you disembowel Marxism as an economic theory, but you want to maintain ideas like the worker is alienated from his work. He's working on his production line and he's putting cherries on top of Bakewell tarts all day, and he's not using and developing his skills, and he's working for what we might now call minimum wage. We're saying, well, that's dehumanizing. Now, I beg to differ, but what we can say is it's not particularly stimulating work, and if you've got a lot of people doing that, they might not be particularly enjoying the work, and probably enjoyment as an index is a good measure of productivity. So if people do become alienated from the work that they're doing, then there will be consequences. But when you try and when you get rid of the economic aspect of the inequality, you've got to maintain, because the economic theory of Marx got busted, you've then got to find other aspects of that situation that are problematic. So you've got to maintain the oppression bit. So all the postmodern stuff is an analysis of power. Someone's got power over somebody else, and they're a big player. So it's like whites, so-called, have power over blacks. That's not historically true, but whites basically did have power over blacks, and but not because they were white and the others were black. So at the end of the day, it's just the way things developed. So
the dynamics before were, when we talk about the slave trade, we've always seemed to be taught that whites went to Africa, enslaved Africans and took them places. We never speak about, the Africans that enslaved their own people and sold them. We don't talk about the Africans at the Barbary that came to Europe and took slaves. We have to talk about all of this bigger picture, because, again, we still see these same hands, don't we, Alex? The same hands that are doing all this international relations throughout everywhere. We see it. And when countries haven't got that, that's when we go and liberate them, don't we? We give them democracy. We help them. We encourage them, as you said, with China. All of a sudden, from give them heroin, we just walk in. They just invite us in the end. This is warfare at the end of the day. It's not just about blowing things up, is it?
No, it's not. And just to answer Tim Foyle in the chat, I don't really like the Green Party. No, I think the point I was making was that, again, you could get in trouble, couldn't you, for just saying that bloke. But obviously that's a bloke. To be honest with you, when I first saw it before, the talking started, I wasn't expecting to hear a male voice. I just thought it was a particularly unappealing woman. So it was just a bit of the hair. I thought, actually,
I'm going to have to stop you there, mate. I'm going to have to stop you there. I don't know where you're going with that.
No, I'm not going anywhere in particular. I'm just
Councillor Barlow, mate. Councillor Barlow. We'll just leave it there.
yeah, Councillor Barlow. But the point I was wanting to make originally was, by giving some credit, he's saying, look, although you'll attract some lunatics because we've given power to all types of minorities, so that, I don't know if you've seen that reel going around doing the rounds about that woman, that rather large woman, barking outside of a shop, and this big dog comes and attacks her. It's got hold of her and it's ragging like her, and so I say, are you okay? And suddenly she's not a dog anymore. She's a panicking female. Now what I'm saying is there's obviously a bunch of barking people because of these policies where, it was no longer just about economic disparity. It was about any type of difference was a power play. But there are some really genuine damaged people who really believe. So, for example, it struck me that person speaking then, although they're a bloke, ultimately seems like a fairly sweet, decent human being who's just got some deranged ideas. Now,
look at his policies. look at what his priorities were, Alex. You know, there's bigger priorities. They are in. You know, it's important to keep our green spaces and things like that. But if that's a priority with where we're at, you know, I mean, they're selling land off left, right, and centre. If we took the other priorities, they wouldn't be doing this. It's like they believe they're immune. They can't get stopped. You know, it's very strange to see them doing it right in front of people's faces. Sorry for interrupting, mate.
It's all right. I seem to have triggered Tifa too with unappealing woman. Five question marks. Yeah, I don't know what the objection is, but yeah, you know. So, for example, you could find a woman appealing, and which is quite possible if you're a bloke, I would have thought, and then you could find a woman not to your taste. Well, that would be an unappealing woman. So at first, I thought this was just an unappealing woman, but it turns out it was a bloke. But that's nothing to do with it being a Green Party representative. Many people who've been bullied, they then step up and they advocate for everyone who's been oppressed and bullied. So, you know, just because they've got some lunatic policies on climate and other stuff, because they believe they need to protect the environment from bullies, the capitalist bullies, you know, the people dumping toxic waste. Well, that's not untrue. People do bully the environment and dump toxic waste, but that doesn't mean we need to develop a whole bunch of crazy policies around inequality which don't apply. It's just like, just don't harm the planet. Don't do stupid things. You don't need to go to extremes and start telling wacky stories. You know, I mean, I think if you remember when the state started to give corporates the same right as persons, as people, called, you know, persons, as we say, people, they were giving corporates personhood. And while we know what that means, for most people, that's quite significant. And then in South America, I think it was Venezuela, started to give trees the same rights as people. Now, that was clearly corrective to try and balance this emphasis of giving corporates rights under the law the same as individuals. So, you know, in the name of climate and protection of the environment and so on, I think it was Venezuela protected trees by giving them the rights of people. Now, that's insanity. You know, you can't give trees rights, but you can understand the gesture of why they did it. They were trying to correct another error and saying, well, if you can take something that isn't an actual living entity, a corporation, and say it's got rights, you can do the same for trees. So I understand the spirit in which it was done, but by counteracting one form of insanity with another, you can see why the world's got itself into the state that it has.
Treebeard might debate you on that one, Alex. Go on, Taylor. What? Treebeard.
All right.
So I know we're low on time, but considering what has happened a few days ago, I wanted to there is one article I wanted to read from and talk about for a little bit before we head off.
Well, you've got 5 minutes, so can you read it quick?
Yeah, I can read it quick. I'm usually a pretty quick reader. Okay. Do you see the do you see that I have it linked, or that I have my screen shared?
Yes.
Okay. So let's go ahead and begin. This is about Mr. Ted Turner. I'm sure you heard about that whole thing. He quote unquote passed away a few days ago.
No, I haven't.
Yeah, Mr. Globalist, Mr. Reduce the World Population. Yeah, he's apparently he's passed away, assuming he wasn't kept on ice. But regardless, dispossessed Goy dies at 87. New York Times, Ted Turner, creator of CNN and the 24-hour news cycle, dies at 87. As one of the most important figures in media history, he oversaw a vast cable empire of news, sports, and entertainment channels. So let's go ahead and begin this. Heads up, Satan. Incoming. Ted the Red Turner has died at age 87, assuming he wasn't being kept on ice for propaganda crimes. Who knows? Though we have no receipts to support such an assertion, the editorial board here at the Anti-New York Times was long suspecting, and I agree with them, by the way, on this, that the UN-loving globalists behind CNN, cable news network, Turner Classic Movies, and the Captain Planet propaganda cartoon of the 1990s may have been the mysterious wealthy Georgian who erected the genocide-promoting New World Order Georgia Guidestones. And it makes sense considering the fact that this was he is Georgian. This is the same man who, actually, we'll get into the reasoning in a second. Thankfully, that monstrosity, located exactly 666 miles from the United Nations in Manhattan, was destroyed by the White Hats in 2022. Turner established CNN. Here's a little bit of history, a little bit of background for those who don't know. Turner established CNN in Atlanta in 1980, just 2 months after the Georgia Guidestones were erected. The cable TV network pioneered the 24-hour news cycle at a time when few thought that such an idea would be viable. It was particularly after its coverage of the hyped-up Gulf War of 1991 that the network became a national powerhouse. That same year, the notorious communist bitch Jane Fonda and Ted Turner were married, a power couple which lasted for 10 years. Hanoi Jane and Ted the Red remained close friends, with Fonda affectionately referring to Turner as the favorite of her 3 ex-husbands. In 1997, Turner famously pledged $1 billion to support United Nations causes. To this end, he created the UN Foundation, a public charity to fund pretextual UN schemes related to children's health, the environment, and women's rights. And, of course, we know where that's just code. That's globalist code lingo for communist globalist subversion of pretty much everything you could think of. Fucking motorcycles. Ignore that background noise, please. Super annoying. So a public share. Okay, so yes, sir. When it came to globalist credentials, the up-and-coming media mogul Ted Turner checked all the boxes. There was just one wee little problem with this new kid on the block. You see, Ted Turner was a pure goy. Ultra-libtarded or not, Turner was still an Anglo and a good old boy from the South to boot. Not kosher. The cabal wanted one of their own at the helm of mighty CNN, as was the case and had always been the case with the existing TV giants of ABC, CBS, and NBC. A couple of pictures right here. First and second images, the Georgia Guidestones were paid for by an anonymous wealthy donor, presumably from Georgia. CNN was established in Atlanta just 90 miles east, just 2 months later. Bit of a coincidence? I don't know. We can't say for certain, but it's pretty likely that it was Turner. Continuing, third image, in 2001, Turner and fellow globalists Bill Gates Sr., George Soros, and David Rockefeller and others were honored in New York City for their globalist quote-unquote philanthropy. We know what that means. And then here are the big 3 networks of the time, even going back to as far as the 1920s during the days of radio before television. CBS, Jewish. Bill Paloff, the son of William. That's William Paley, CBS, Jewish, came to the United States in the 1900s, I believe, from Tsarist Russia. Second image, Leonard Goldenson of ABC, also Jewish. And 3, Robert Sarnoff, the son of David Sarnoff. When CNN was established, there were only 3 national TV giants, each of them headed by a single Jewish mogul or Jewish family since the advent of TV itself. And even going back, like I said, as far back as the 1920s when radio was first coming about. Though every bit as politically correct in quotes as all of them, Ted Turner was still different. Most people have always assumed that Turner ran CNN up until recent times. This is not the case. Although the cabal certainly did not mind the erroneous perception of such, Turner actually began to lose control of CNN to Time Warner CEO Gerald Levin, cough cough, aka Jewish, following the 1996 sale of Turner Broadcasting to Time Warner. That made him vice chairman of the merged entity, subordinating him to Levin. In 2001, AOL and Time Warner merged. Levin then totally sidelined Turner by stripping him of his role overseeing cable networks. Turner was rendered subordinate to new management. When Turner protested, Levin stripped him of his authority over CNN and other networks, and subsequently his vice chairmanship title. It was quite a blow for an egomaniac like Turner to be gradually muscled out of leadership roles for the company which he built. Those who knew him say that the betrayal was personally devastating and that he was, quote, deeply saddened over losing his quote-unquote baby, as he called it, and then essentially fired. Turner deeply regretted his decisions, telling the New Yorker in 2001, quote, "I made a mistake. The mistake I made was losing control of the company, end quote. Indeed, Turner's mistake was the same one made by European royals and the Anglo-American elite who naively thought they could trust in and partner up with the usual suspects to their mutual benefit. How'd that work out for you, Teddy? Silly guy. Gerald Levin, 1939 to 2024. Here's a little caption here. Careful who you get in bed with. Yeah. Trump's log said Turner claims new ownership destroyed CNN. And here's the thing. That little tidbit at the end is very important to keep in mind, because many of these so-called Anglo-Saxon overachieving libtards and royals over the centuries have, back in the 1800s, for example, back in the early 1800s, the royal families of Europe, they borrowed money from the Rothschilds in order to take down Napoleon. So and that's when Rothschild pretty much bought up Britain and France at the same time. The famous buying up the stock market. Later on, and then of course, where did that get them? These royals, these arrogant ass royals, thought that they could rule the world with the Jewish cabal together. They got the money, we've got the manpower, we got the continents and everything. We could rule the world together. Look what happened. Within the next century, almost every single royal family in Europe is gone, and the only ones left are basically just figureheads with no political power of their own. So, yeah, and then the same thing for the Anglo-Saxon elite in New York in the early 20th century, at the turn of the century. They thought that these people like Jacob Schiff and Bernard Baruch, Rabbi Wise, etc., were all just good rich people that they could do business with. Look what happened at the end of World War I and then World War II. All of them were gone. Several of them died on the Titanic. Others died other mysterious deaths, like J.P. Morgan. So, yeah, it's this is a continuous theme throughout history. That you got these greedy ass and power hungry quote unquote goy Anglo-Saxon, and they try to borrow money or team up with the cabal, with the Jewish cabal. It doesn't work. It never works. They always usurp you, and then they leave you with nothing. And that's what happened to Ted Turner. Just another classic case.
To be fair, every time you use the term Jew or Jewish, it's just the star of Remphan. It goes all the way back. You're right, that Taylor goes all the way back. That star that all these people are standing under, this is ancient Baal worship. Somebody mentioned in the chat room earlier about the black cube, which is the Kaaba. That used to be worshipped. They used to worship Hubal there. That's Muhammad's tribe, where his family come from. They used to worship Hubal, which is Baal worship. So you've got the Muslims laughing at the Jews saying that they worship Baal, where their actual history comes from that kind of worship as well. And nothing's changed, Taylor. It's the same thing, but you are right about greedy guys who are willing to sell their own mothers out for things like this. That's why you don't have to be Jewish to be a Zionist.
Exactly.
It's all that terminology has all been taken over. There's I had to have this one for you, Taylor, this clip, because you're going to have to answer this, because this could scupper the plans.
They're contemplating measures like suicide dolphins, dolphins equipped with mines to try to go after U.S. ships. So that's not a measure which projects real strength.
Wait, I'm sorry. You have to. How would that even work?
That they're contemplating
suicide dolphins, Taylor. Come on.
Suicide dolphins. I feel like
dolphins come into it.
I feel like I've heard of something like that before. I could be wrong, but
they're going to strap. The Iranians are going to strap bombs to dolphins, and dolphins are going to go after U.S. ships because they'll be able to tell by the flag, and just go up, nudge your bomb onto the hull of the ship. I think I saw it in the A-Team once, or Fall Guy or something like that, years ago. But the laughter that we're having now, they really are laughing right in our faces, and it doesn't seem that anybody can do anything about it. So it's interesting to see how it's all falling apart, to be fair, Taylor, whether there's a plan for this or not. But yeah, I'm like you. I want to start seeing things now. I don't want it to be all nicey and played out slowly. Let's just get to the quick, let's spill the blood.
Rip the Band-Aid off.
Yes, indeed. Well, do you want to give out your contact details in that, Taylor, and wrap up for us?
Yeah, sure. Before that, though, I just want to say Martin made a hilarious joke in the chat earlier. I forget. I'm scrolling up to see what it was, but he said something. He said something that was pretty funny. But regardless, oh, here it is. A woman can have a penis. Most of them do, just can't have one attached to their body. I like that one. Good one. Good one, Martin. Anyway, so yeah, my Gmail account, my email is chimpyskippy@gmail.com. My YouTube page and my Rumble page is the Raconteurs Report. Please, if you feel so inclined, subscribe and leave any feedback you have in the comments section. And I have a Rumble wallet now, so you can donate to that if you feel so inclined. No pressure, but and also my Twitter account is also Raconteurs Report. So I try to keep the name consistent throughout my different social media, so it's easier to find me for people. And that's really it. I'm hoping, like I said, hopefully this whole thing moves soon. We have been told there were hints that Obama is going to be arrested before the so-called opening of this presidential library in mid-June. Again, though, I don't want to date fag because that's just we've been let down so many times before. But hey, I'm just going to throw it out there, because we, no, I'm not going to get into that conversation. We're already out of time. But yeah, that's pretty much it. And thanks again for having me on as always. I'm sorry that I haven't been appearing on as much late in the last 2 weeks. I try my best. I've been multitasking, trying to cover different things. So I do apologize for that.
No worries, mate. I'll speak to you through the week. I'll send you the link.
All right, sounds good. Appreciate it. Appreciate it. And thanks again for having me on. Appreciate it. God bless.
Cheers, Taylor. Nat, God bless.
Yep, God bless, guys.
Cheers, Taylor. Yeah, bye.
In summing up then, sir.
I mean, apart from suggesting that anybody in the chat who voted Green should have a lifetime ban from the Webster report, it was good to see that the Greens made very little impact, and I suspected that would be what would happen because they'd been artificially hoisted to try and become a credible alternative to Keir Starmer, just more radical, but they had to go left of Starmer instead of right of Starmer. But they knew that those disaffected who hated reform probably wouldn't go, well, they wouldn't go Conservative from Labour, perhaps Lib Dem. But they spotted an opportunity to create this situation with Polanski and get him talking all the right sort of stuff to attract the lunatics. So it's good that, only a small number of inroads were made by the Greens. I knew it was sort of artificial, but now, just by with entering into the point that it's great news that Reform took so many seats. Regardless of what you think about Reform UK, they fielded a lot of candidates, even some who could barely speak English, and they'll get criticised for doing that. Some of them probably products of the asylum policy, probably in some senses migrants, because they had to sign people up to contest all these council seats. Now, typically what happens with things like that is, after a few weeks, because they were a paper candidate, they weren't really a real candidate, they're not really interested in being a councillor, so you get many resignations and so on, defections and so on. So it may well be that Reform come in for some criticism, but it was vital that they did what they did. in order to show just how disaffected people are with Keir Starmer. Obviously, the goal of Labour and why he resolutely says, I'm not going to leave, is because he's a paid puppet and he is fast-tracking through all the changes that they want to implement. I mean, that landlord bill came through in May, making it harder for private landlords, tying them in red tape. They legislate everything. That's the next part of the land grab. It's the property grab, so that you will own nothing and be happy. They are implementing the policy, fast-tracking things through at a rate of knots, getting a large number of migrants in, changing the demographic base, ignoring the wishes of the people, engaging in catastrophic economic policy to destroy this country. So obviously, Starmer's been put in place to effect exactly that. That's why he won't go until he's forced. But it's good. Regardless of what happens with reform in the next general election, it's good that there's some leverage against Keir Starmer, because everything that he's been doing is absolutely catastrophic for the United Kingdom. The sooner he's out, the better.
I would say that leverage it has been put in place exactly for that, because there's no way people wanted to go back to Conservatives, and Starmer has definitely done what you've said, because it's what he did when he was chief prosecutor, when he was able to keep Jimmy Savile from being prosecuted. So we've seen this. Well, we've seen it forever, haven't we? It's just we can see it so blatantly now, mate. The thing is, it's like you said, that this is the next step, because there has to be a step. Conservatives, Labour, nobody know what to do. Would they all go to independence and then maybe start a grassroots? Maybe that's why we've been presented with an alternative. It's just I'm so sceptical of these parties, mate. I know that they're all wanting the same thing. They're just coming at it from different angles. Maybe reform will be a more scenic route. Who knows?
Yeah, well, yeah.
Thanks to everybody.
Variety.
Yeah, thanks to everybody in the chat room who's been with us for the 2 hours. It's been lively in there again as usual. Thanks to everybody who's watching after the show and who sends us comments and that. We do this again to try and cause conversation, cause questions. At the end of the day, we know that the world's fallen. We know that the world's falling, and we know where it's going. And we also know that there's only one way out of this, and it isn't a religion. It's the absolute opposite, and it's a relationship with the one true God. It's the only way, guys. God bless. See you next week.
trusting high, while the court magicians of Pharaoh tell another digital lie. From the Barcock bar revolves to the naming of the place. The displacement of the spirit is the only thing that remains. The angel of light is dressed in a suit and a gown, trying to claim the lead, trying to wear the crown. But you better know what a woman is before you sit down. Be humble in your